attacked.
All right, so we are back. So Peanut Gallery, we're doing heckling from the hard camera. He did not have a picture just because it was a weird weekend.
That and I really couldn't find any way to kind of demonstrate it. But if you did watch the show, there were some rules that were implemented that make the Lucha Libre style matches very unique. And I'm going to touch on that right now. In tag team matches, when the legal wrestler of a team touches the floor outside the ring, the teammate may enter the ring to take his or her place as the legal competitor. As the legal wrestler can step to the floor willingly, there is essentially no need for an actual tag to a teammate to bring him or her into the match. This often allows for a much more frenetic action to take place in the ring than would otherwise be possible under standard tag rules. And we saw that tonight.
Right, a lot of those.
Especially that first match, when you had that first match, when the competitor went outside the ring, the other person took that person's place, right?
Right.
And that's just one of the things that Lucha Libre has really... that's how they set themselves apart, and I think we saw it during the trios matches too. There's a very heavy emphasis on tag teams in general,
right? With
Lucha Libre,
but you have the standard tag, you have the 6-man tag or the trios tag, and then you also have the mixed tag,
right? So I found that very unique that the tag team matches themselves are so different, and you were even commenting, Tiger, on the fact that that person wasn't tagged in, but here they are in the ring all of a sudden.
Right, and they're doing moves.
Right.
And, I'm so used to it having tags because with American wrestling and Japanese wrestling, that is pretty standard for the most part. I think Japanese is a little more lax about that, but they were a little more lax about the rules in general, at least as a part of New Japan.
Right.
But with AAA, it's just something that is hard to adjust because we don't, number one, cover a lot of Lucha Libre stuff. And then also, it's just not the culture that we're in. Right. Anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so as far as singles matches go, Lucha Libre matches are very similar to American singles matches. They can be won by pinning the opponent on the mat to the count of 3, making them submit, or knocking them out of the ring for a predetermined count, which actually is generally a 20 count.
Well, because the 20 count is actually a very traditional way of doing it. It was really, they made it to a 10 count due for not having too much of a prolonged period of time because American wrestling fans have the attention span of a fucking thimble.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to it's kind of hard to kind of keep them ingrained when it's a 20 count.
Right. Or, of course, disqualification also can happen to end the match too. Using the ropes for leverage is illegal, of course.
Right.
And once a luchador is on the ropes, the opponent must release the holds and will not be able to pin them. So, as far as singles matches go, those are pretty standard.
They're fairly standard.
I think that it gets unique once it goes to the tag teams because none of those rules really apply.
Mixed and then multi-man is definitely going to be different because
and mixed tag teams is something else that's unique in Mexico too.
The what?
The mixed tags.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Like the men versus the women sort of thing.
Women will take on men, but also there was one that we didn't talk about that I actually thought was interesting because they have a lot of. I say this, I'm not being technically, I'm not being culturally incorrect about this, but they call them transvestite wrestlers.
Yeah, that can go for both men's and women's titles.
Right, so Pimpinela Escalada, for example, is a former Reina de Reinas champion because he, even though he's a straight man, plays the androgynous trans character.
Right. So
they can go for that. And that's why Maximo, even though he was replaced, he had the opportunity to go and tag with Mr. Iguana for the mixed tag.
Right. Here's something that I thought was unique about Lucha Libre rules. That there are some holds, some moves even, that are considered illegal moves. Most notably, the pile driver. If you use a pile driver in a Lucha Libre match, you get disqualified.
Oh.
Yeah. So there are some holds and moves that are illegal to use and are grounds for disqualification in Lucha Libre rules.
Now, And that's kind of interesting because, you know, the Lucha Brothers, especially Pentagon, one of his big moves is package pile driver.
Right. And there are some variations of it that are legal, but they have to be very careful about utilizing the pile driver.
Interesting.
And I think that has to do with the fact that they're always flipping and stuff. They're, you know, high, whatever.
It's a high octane style.
Exactly.
Interesting. Very.
Yeah. You know, of course, hitting your opponent in the groin, other outside interference, attacks on the referee, or disqualification if you rip the opponent's mask off.
Yes.
And we're going to talk a little bit about we talked about it briefly beforehand, but the mask being an important symbol of Lucha Libre style.
And I will be talking about those stipulation matches here later. But that's interesting. I didn't know that if a mask is ripped off like that, it would be a disqualification. Right. Now, ripping the mask off and ripping the mask apart are different.
Right.
So you can still, and that's a heel tactic, is ripping the mask apart. And we saw that during the Psycho Circus match. Psycho Clown's mask was ripped apart by Escorpion because they're going to be having a mask versus hair match at Triple Mania next month. Yeah. Or not next month, the month after.
Right.
No, it is next month. It's July. Yeah. Right.
And then, you know, of course, we're going off of masks. The wager matches, Lucha de Apuestas actually got its start in Mexican wrestling as well.
Right, well, that's the stipulation one. Right. Mask, hair.
Yeah,
that's what those are.
Let's see, I have it here. Mask, hair. There's mask or hair versus title. Mm-hmm. There's mask or hair versus career. There's career versus career. There's a bet for the name. As well, which is a very rare type.
There was really only one that I can possibly think of right now, and that was La Parka versus La Parka for that name.
Or it's L.A. Park versus
La Parka.
Right. So that was kind of interesting too. That actually got its origination within Latin American. I can call it Latin American wrestling because really it's more of a Latin American trend, not just a Mexican trend.
Right.
But that's where it's most well known.
Right.
Another thing too is that of course Latin America has way more weight classes than American.
And also the title, and also they're very strict about regional champions too, especially there. So, for example, it's not, you know, within Triple A per se, even though they have quite a bit of titles.
Right.
But CMLL has like the Guadalajara run of champions. They have world champions. They have NWA historic. They have national.
Right.
So there's a lot of, that's why they have 29 different champions, because they have those denominations.
Right, and so that's very important fact. Another thing too about title matches, Lucha de Apuestas matches are seen as more important than title matches are.
Yes, they are.
So in Mexico, title matches are not very frequent because they view Lucha de Apuestas matches to be more important.
Right, because it's humiliation. Right. And then obviously taking off the mask is one of those things where, well, beforehand it was very much a thing of retirement when you were able to take off your mask.
Right.
It's not as much now because you still have like Dr. Wagner Jr. who was unmasked, but he's still competing as Ray Wagner.
Yep.
You know, there's a lot there.
Right. And the only other thing I had as far as uniqueness with Mexican wrestling is the drag. So Exoticos, who can go for any title.
And that's been around forever. And then what about minis?
Oh, yes, the minis
You didn't talk about minis at all.
So minis, they play under pretty much the same rules. They're just the midgets, and they're, you know, they have their own unique.
Now each company is going to have it differently. So something like with Triple A, I think they actually have to have dwarfism to be considered a part of their actual thing. But with Triple A, it's
you mean with CMLL?
No, CMLL is dwarfism. Triple A is a height requirement.
Oh, okay.
So if you are a certain height, you can be in there without having dwarfism. But in CMLL, because when they started doing midget wrestling, which was actually a commodity.
I don't know about you, but it seems like AAA doesn't put as much emphasis on it.
They don't.
But that's just
because they're a much newer company. They
right,
started
and then
in the
they
90s.
also their outlook on just like going out there, because they're very much geared more towards an American audience.
Right.
In my opinion,
Also,
than CMLL is.
their emphasis more actually. So they do it interchangeably with the women's division.
Right.
So Triple A is more focused on the women's division for the most part, but CMLL is more focused on the minis division.
Mm-hmm.
So, and yes, I'm not saying that. I mean, it's mini escuela, so it's they're midgets. That's
Right.
That's what they classify them as.
They're short people.
There's mini and micro, for God's sake.
Yeah, there's micro as well. Yeah, and that's even shorter than the minis.
Right.
And that is only on CMLL.
That is only on CMLL because
So yeah,
they're like 2'9".
I find it very interesting. Is there anything that you really wanted to add to some of the unique rules that go around lucha matches? I think that we covered a lot of the big bases with that.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I really I love covering Lucha Libre.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's so different and unique, and just the commentary to like get you excited about that.
It's Spot Fest Central. So if you're looking for ground and pound traditional American wrestling, you're not going to get
Which
that
is
here.
ironic because Lucha Libre has its start in Greco-Roman wrestling,
Right.
just like American wrestling does. It's so different and unique.
Right,
to
and
kinda
then like
see
with the
how-
costumes, they have the
Right.
masks, but that we obviously have already talked about that. Maybe we'll revisit it at another time. So when we come back, I'm going to be talking about the history of the event, Verano de Escalado. I butchered that nicely.
Escalado.
Same thing. Anyway, so we'll come back and we'll talk about that.
All right.